we start. But next,
So we're going to talk today in Mirza Hashem about what's called BiVirkas HaShanim, and that refers to the distinction between what's called Haskaras Kishamim and She'elas Kisham. Haskaras Kishamim is Mashav Ruach Morad Goshem, which we began with Shmini Atzeres, and that's part of Birchas HaShevach. That's praise for Hashem for bringing the rains. And then we have what's called She'elas Kishamim. That's a whole different concept. That's requesting rain. That's not part of Shevach, but rather part of Bakosha. So the concept of rain fits into two categories. It can be subsumed onto Shevach, and it forms an integral part of Tefillah in the first three brachos. We'll have to see why it's appropriate to mention God's Yeshamim in Birchas HaGvura, in the second of the 19 brachos, but that, in any event, is part of the entity called Shevach. And then we have Geshem as part of Bakosh, as part of what we call petition, prayer, and asking for rains. That's in the 9th bracha of the Shmon Esrei, Birchas HaShanim, Birchas HaParnosa, and we ask for rain. Here there's a distinction between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. No distinction as far as Mashav Ruach, because Haskaras Kishamim in Shevach is absolutely universal at the time of Shmini Atzeres. Of course, we need what's called Hachroza, and that'll take place before the Musaf service of Shmini Atzeres. But with that Hachroza, Mashav Ruach becomes an integral part of the Matbea Shel Tefillah, not to be omitted. If one forgets Mashav Ruach, then he repeats Shmon Esrei. If he remembers within Shmon Esrei, then he goes back to that bracha, and we'll see about other possibilities as well. If he doesn't remember whether indeed he mentioned Mashav Ruach, then as a general rule, we assume he did not, and he omitted it. And that's true before he repeats it 90 times, which is a 30-day period. Now, where is the distinction between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz? That's with regard to Bakoshas Kishamim. And the takana was made, and the Gemara in Taanis records that we should not be asking for Geshamim, even in Eretz Yisrael, immediately following the Sukkot holiday, even though we desperately need the rains. This is the rainy season. But rather, we're going to postpone it for a period of 14 days. And we'll only begin asking for Geshamim in the 9th bracha of Shmon Esrei with the conclusion of the first week of Cheshvan. Today is the first day of Cheshvan, and here in Eretz Yisrael on the 7th of Cheshvan, just 1 week into the month of Mar Cheshvan, we begin to request rain. The Gemara asks, why don't we begin to request rain simultaneous with Bakoshas, with Haskaras Kishamim, since already at that point we could use the rains? But the answer is to allow the Ole Regel to return home after Aliyah L'Regel. And if, let's say, it takes the furthest point in Eretz Yisrael a period of 14 days to return to the land, to his final home, where he lives, where his yeshiv is, so we're going to allow him to go without asking for rains, because if we ask for rains, that will interrupt his ability to travel comfortably, safely back to his home. And we want to facilitate Aliyah L'Regel.
Are the traffic jams that bad these days?
Very bad. And they're getting worse with time. So on the 7th of Cheshvan, we'll begin to integrate our Bakosh of Geshamim into the 9th bracha here in Eretz Yisrael. In Chutz La'aretz, we're going to wait until December, and there's a lot of discussion about which date in December, 4th or 5th, has to do with the equinox, and also questions of areas on the face of the globe that might need rains either later in the year after Pesach, where we're already shifted to the same, we're asking no longer for rains. We just maybe mention Tal, if at all, but we don't mention rain. And yet those areas geographically, topographically need rain, or there are areas which require rain earlier in the year, especially areas in the Mediterranean closer to the land of Israel. But there's a certain kind of a low plug to uniformly begin asking for rain in the Chutz La'aretz on the same day. And in Eretz Yisrael, it's not an issue at all. It's always going to be after that 2-week period has in. What I'd like to discuss with you now is the question of what is the status of Bakashas Geshamim? And the two possibilities are as follows. Is Bakashas Geshamim an essential part of the bracha of Parnasa, the 9th bracha of Baruch Aleinu Hashanah Zos, etc., and it becomes a critical part of the bracha? We call it the Matbeah Shel bracha, just like Hazkaras Geshamim. Mashiv Haruach is an integral and critical part of the second bracha of Sheva. Or, alternatively, Bakashas Geshamim is fundamentally different than Hazkaras Geshamim, whereas the latter is essential and is integrated into the very fabric of the Matbeah Shel Tefillah. Bakashas Geshamim is a separate additional bakasha, and even in its absence, we are still asking for Parnasa, Baruch Aleinu Hashanah Zos. We may not have specified and focused on Geshem, but we definitely accomplished the bare bones bakasha of the 9th bracha, namely we've asked Hashem to bless us with the shefa and the bracha and the parnasa that we need, but we omitted the mention of Geshem. And it's not an integral part of the Matbeah, it's really a Tosefes bakasha. Now, the halacha is, and we'll soon see it inside, that if one omitted not only Mashiv Haruach, which is Hazkaras Geshamim, but also the same Talumato Livracha in Bakashas Geshamim, in both cases, Machzirin also, he will have to repeat Shmon Esrei, which seems to indicate quite clearly that these two requirements, these two halachos and tefillah are identical, and they both form a part of the critical and essential Matbeah Shel bracha. However, Tosfos in Brachos on Daf Chavav Hamid Beis says something quite surprising, quite amazing, that seems to sort of shake us out of our assumptions and bring us to new definitions. Kosav Rabbeinu Yehuda, Im Tov Lo Hizkir Rosh Chodesh B'Mincha Lo Yispalel Od Balayla. So we're talking about, let's say, in our case, a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, and on the second day of Rosh Chodesh, he omitted Ya'aleh v'Yavo in Mincha. Or alternatively, if it's a one-day Rosh Chodesh, he omitted Ya'aleh v'Yavo in Mincha. Now, had he omitted Ya'aleh v'Yavo in Shachris, for example, he would have to repeat Shmon Esrei. But Tosfos, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, says that if he omits Ya'aleh v'Yavo Mincha time on Rosh Chodesh, he does not repeat Shmon Esrei if he hasn't reminded himself before the end of Rosh Chodesh. He's got up to Shkia that ends Rosh Chodesh to remind himself and repeat Shmon Esrei and achieve that tefillah. Normally, if one is required to daven and fail to do so, he has what's called a tefillas tashlumin. And in this case, it would mean, if not for Rabbeinu Yehuda in Tosfos, that Ma'ariv time, which is already the second day of the month, he would complete his first Shmon Esrei and then recite his second. The second Shmon Esrei in that series would be a tefillas tashlumin for the tefillas mincha that he omitted. And Tosfos says no. He will not daven a tefillas tashlumin, even though had he reminded himself when it was Mibod Yom and it was still Rosh Chodesh, he would have recited a second Shmon Esrei to replace the first where he omitted Ya'aleh v'Yavo. If he reminds himself when it's too late to recite Ya'aleh v'Yavo, then Tosfos says there's no point to repeat Shmon Esrei as a tefillas tashlumin arvis on the second day of the month, because in the language of Tosfos, lama yispalel od. I'll translate it in the following way, my own language. What does he gain by adding a Shmon Esrei at night? Had the Shmon Esrei at night, the tashlumin, the second, been identical to the one that he omitted, nicha, that's called tefillas tashlumin. And the chiddush is that in the ona smucha, he can replace the Shmon Esrei by duplicating it, and then it replaces the Shmon Esrei that he missed in the previous ona. But if his Shmon Esrei as tashlumin is identical to the invalid Shmon Esrei, the invalid tefillah that he prayed in the previous ona, in other words, if he omitted X and in his tashlumin he cannot supply X, if his tefillah was incomplete because he left out some bakasha, and in his tashlumin he has no possibility, he doesn't have the wherewithal of reciting that bakasha, then to use a phrase in Chazal, ma hu'ilu chachamim, what do you gain by that tefillas tashlumin? In other words, Rabbeinu Yehuda in Tosfos argues that the tefillas tashlumin has to fix up, has to replace that which was missing in the original tefillah. So if, for example, he left out Ya'aleh v'Yavo in Shachris, then mincha time he'll recite a second Shmon Esrei with Ya'aleh v'Yavo, and he'll replace exactly what he omitted from the first Shmon Esrei. That's fine. That's the case of Shachris. But in the case of Mincha, and again, I'm not talking about Mincha on the first of a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, but rather Mincha on the second day of a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, or Mincha on a 1-day Rosh Chodesh, then it's impossible for him to say Ya'aleh v'Yavo in his tefillas tashlumin Ma'ariv time when it's the second day of the month. Because Ya'aleh v'Yavo is a prayer that is only appropriate on that day, that's sanctified with its own unique mitzvah because of the time element in that day. And therefore, he's going to repeat a Shmon Esrei for the purpose of filling in the missing blanks, of offering Ya'aleh v'Yavo where he omitted Ya'aleh v'Yavo, but he can't do that because it's already the second day of the month. If Cain says Tosas Eino Marviach Klum, if Yachzor Yispal B'Motzoi Rosh Chodesh, Sharei Lo Yazkir Od Tfilas Yalav Yovel. B'Yudches Brachos Kvar Hispalem. So before we analyze the logic of Rabbeinu Yehuda, let's just translate the words of Rabbeinu Yehuda. What we call Taichverta. Rabbeinu Yehuda is saying, we talk about in business, right? We have something called pragmatism. There are certain investments that are pragmatic. They're logical because they will bring in dividends. You'll gain something. Says Rabbeinu Yehuda, Mayar Viach, what does he gain pragmatically by repeating a Shmon Esrei to replace that Shmon Esrei in which he omitted Yalav Yomo, if in the repeat Shmon Esrei, he will not be able to recite Yalav Yomo. But that's not all that Rabbeinu Yehuda says. He adds another few words. Let's pay attention to his language. The Yud Ches Kvar Hispalel. He already prayed his Yud Ches Brachos, his Tefillah. That he has. You can't deny that he did that Mincha time on Rosh Chodesh. Those are the words of Rabbeinu Yehuda. And Rav Soloveitchik, quoting his grandfather, Reb Chaim Brisker, raises the following objection. Wait a minute. Whenever you miss a tefillah, the Rabbanan established tefillas tashlumin. Why are you making all these pragmatic calculations when the takana was that a tefillas tashlumin is considered a tefillah to replace the tefillah that you omitted? As far as halach is concerned, if he left out Yalav Yovo, then he has omitted that tefillah. And the proof in the pudding is that he has to repeat Shmon Esrei. Oh, you're saying, but wait a minute, he's not going to gain anything on Motzei Rosh Chodesh because it's already the second of the month, and he won't be able to replace the Yalav Yovo that he omitted. Says Reb Chaim, what difference does that make? The takana and the establishment and the power of Tfilas Tashlumin is to add a Shmon Esrei. It's almost as if within a certain period of time, you need a number of Shmon Esreis. Let's say, for example, let's talk about a 24-hour period of time that's made up of 3 different onos of tefillah of Ma'ariv, Shachris, and Mincha. So you have the 3 onos of tefillah. And, just excuse me for one split second. Yeah, apologize, sorry. Okay. So what we have in Tfilas Tashlumin is that if instead of 3 tfilos during a period of a day, he only prayed 2 tfilos, then we're going to attach the next ona to the previous ona in order to be mashlim that number of tfilos. And in this case, I'm leave out Musaf for a second because that's not relevant to us. But let's say in this case of Rosh Chodesh, he doesn't have the 3 basic tfilos because he left out Yal V'Yovo and he has to repeat Shmon Esrei. So his Shmon Esrei without Yal V'Yovo is not worth a dime. And therefore, Tfilas Tashlumin kicks in to complement, or shall we say supplement, for that last tefillah that he missed in order to achieve the number 3, the magic number. So I'll read to you the language here of Reb Chaim, as quoted here in the Hegyonei Halacha. He writes, the B'shachach v'lo omar talu motor b'mincha, the Erev Shabbos. Reb Chaim says, wait a minute. What happens if on Mincha, on an Erev Shabbos, he omitted She'elas Geshamim? Right, Bakosh Geshamim, the same Talmud to Levracha. Now that's the 9th bracha, part of the Bakoshos. On the night of Shabbos, Friday night, when he gets to Ma'ariv, there is no Bakosha of Geshamim. There's Haskaras Geshamim, but not Bakoshas Geshamim. We don't have Bakoshos. We have 7 brachos, and even the middle bracha is Shevach. It's not Bakosha. There's no Bakosha on Shabbos in the Tefillah. So what is Rabbeinu Yehuda going to say now? He's going to tell me that if I omit Bakoshas Geshamim of the same Talmud Levracha on Friday, then there won't be any Tfilas Tashlumin on Friday night, because again, Ma'yarviyah, because he won't gain anything. He doesn't have that Bakasha on Friday night. V'lo yazkir Talmud Levracha. And this point of Reb Chaim, I found in a sefer called the Yeshuas Yaakov. You may recall that time to time, I quote the Yeshuas Yaakov. His name was Ornstein, Rav Yaakov Ornstein. And that's a gift I got from my bar mitzvah from Rav Aaron Solomon, from my Rebbe's brother. In any event, so this point is made by the Yeshuas Yaakov. And he says that according to Tosfos, if a person omits the same Talmud Levrach on Friday, Mincha time, Erev Shabbos, he will not repeat Shmona Esrei on Leil Shabbos, because Ma'yarviyah, he won't gain anything. He doesn't have the same Talmud Levrach on Shabbos. So his Tfilas Tashlumin cannot replace the Tefillah that he omitted. And Reb Chaim disagrees, without even knowing about the Yeshuas Yaakov. And Reb Chaim says that there's a mistake here in understanding Rabbi Yehuda, the Balatosis. We're making a boo-boo. The Balatosis is saying something totally different. He's saying that Yalav V'Yavo, I'll use a brisket terminology, is a Zaitig Achiv Haskara. Zaitig, meaning it's not part of the essence of the Matbeah Shel Tefillah. Haraya, Rabbi Yehuda, if you remember in Tosfos, adds those 3 words. For a Yud Ches Brachos Kfar Yispalel. He has the basic structure of Shmon Esrei. Norvas, we have a halacha called B'chol Yom V'Yom Tein Lo Me'en Berchosov, and the Yom itself needs to be mentioned and recognized in Tefillah. So as far as Tefillah with Haskar is concerned, Reb Chaim is mechadish that there are 2 different categories. There's one definition called Tefillah, and then there's another obligation called Haskara. The Chiyuv Haskara can only be fulfilled within the framework of Tefillah. It's not enough for a person, like right now, it's Rosh Chodesh, I would say Yalav Yova, Glatt Nevelta, right? That's not worth a dime. The Chiyuv Azkara, the way it was established by Chazal, must be fulfilled within the structure of Shmon Esrei. If a person omits Yalav Yova, like right now, let's say, right now here in Eretz Yisrael, it's already Mincha time. I got up and I davened Mincha. Oh no, I finished Mincha, took my 3 steps back, and I reminded myself I left out Yalav Yova, which hopefully won't happen. After the shir, I go to daven Mincha. I hope I won't omit Yalav Yova because the shir is going to remind me to say Yalav Yova, right? So if I omit Yalav Yova, have I fulfilled the basic mitzvah chiyuv of tefillah? And the answer is yes, according to Rabbi Yehuda. What I'm missing is the fulfillment of a separate, independent chiyuv of Hazkaras Hayom, of B'chol Yom V'Yom Teilo Mein Berchosa. So I will repeat Shmon Esrei, not because I'm missing that tefillah, but I will repeat Shmon Esrei because I'm missing the kiyum of Hazkara. And the kiyum of Hazkara itself generates a chiyuv tefillah. Masha ain't came in the case of the, yeah, Bobby, I'm sorry.
According to this, and it's only a question that I would ask, at least so far what I could think of in Chutz La'aretz, if let's say I daven the Vachadik Shmon Esrei first day of Yontiv.
You didn't mention Yontiv at all in Shmon Esrei.
Daven Vachadik Shmon Esrei on first day of Yontiv. Do I do when I daven? I do a Tefillah Tashlumin, right? I would do a Tefillah Tashlumin at night.
With Yalav Yova.
Never mind Yalav Yova. Yeah,
I'm talking Yontif or you're talking about Yontif Sheni Shel Golios now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yontif Sheni
So
Shel
in other words, if I was in Eretz Yisrael, I would argue that according to the rationale of Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbeinu Yehuda, I wouldn't daven a second Shmon Esrei at night because it's already Chol Hamoed.
No, I don't know what you mean by that, Bobby. In the second
first day
it's Chol Hamoed. That's good enough.
No, but I've done a Vachadik Shmon Esrei. Does that have any?
No, Vachadik Shmon Esrei just means he left out the mention of the day.
Right.
And now he's going to fulfill that on Chol Hamoed by mentioning the day in his tefillas.
Oh, by saying Yalav Yova.
Correct.
Okay, so then I'll ask the question at Yontiv Achron. You're not going to say Yalav Yova anymore. So
no repetition of Shmon Esrei.
Right, okay.
Yeah. But says Reb Chaim, and this is the punchline of what we've been discussing, Ein Adover came with regard to the same Talamot Levracha. Rabbeinu Yehuda and Tosas would agree that if he omitted the same Talamot Levracha on Mincha Erev Shabbos, he's required a Tefillas Tashlumin on Leil Shabbos, despite the fact that he will not ask for Geshamim. Why? Because as opposed to Azkaras Hayom of Yalav Yom Rosh Chodesh, the same Talamot Levracha Bakoshas Geshamim is an essential part of the Matbea Shel Tefillah. He is missing, in effect, the 9th bracha. He has skipped the 9th bracha of Shmon Esrei because he omitted an integral, essential part of that bracha. Therefore, he doesn't have a kiyum of, let's call it 3 tefillos of the day. He's missing Mincha. Mincha is chopped off because he omitted the 9th bracha of Shmon Esrei, and Shmon Esrei requires all 18, all 19, or bust. It's an all or nothing proposition. So because he has left out a Shmon Esrei, he needs a Shmon Esrei as a kiyum tefillah to make up for the number that he's missing on the previous day. He's missing that 3rd tefillah. Whether or not he will fill in the blanks and replace his omission of the same Talamot Levracha is totally irrelevant, even according to Rabbeinu Yehuda. And again, in my language, this is not Reb Chaim's language, the Yeshuas Yaakov made a mistake. He's wrong. He made an equation between two things that are not comparable. He understood that the rule of thumb, according to Rabbeinu Yehuda and Tosfos, is Ma'yarviach. Can he replace the Shmon Esrei and that which he omitted from the original Shmon Esrei? If the answer is yes, then go ahead, you're blessed to daven Tfilas Tashlum. If he's not going to add that which he subtracted, that which he omitted, then the whole enterprise of Tfilas Tashlumin is an exercise in futility. That's how the Yeshuas Yaakov understood Rabbeinu Yehuda and Tosfos and applied it straight across the board. You want to Tfilas Tashlumin because you omitted X? Then answer the following question. Will your Tfilas Tashlumin add a mention of X in order to replace that Shmon Esrei that you omitted? In other words, Tfilas Tashlumin, according to the Yeshuas Yaakov, is simply a matter of plugging in that tefillah that you omitted. If in any event, says the Yeshuas Yaakov, you are not going to plug in that which you omitted by adding a Tfilas Tashlumin, then the entire enterprise is futile. Says Reb Chaim name. That's not always the case. Reb Chaim is arguing that you have a fundamental issue first to resolve. And that is, what is the nature of the omission? And that fits into two categories. This is a typical methodological Reb Chaim Brisker known for Tzvei Dinim. There are Tzvei Dinim in omitting something from Shmon Esrei that forces you to repeat Shmon Esrei. And they should not be equated. One din is a din of a chiyuv haskara, which is extraneous and external to the basic matbea of tefillah. And there's another din that you left out a bracha, you left out an essential part of the matbea shel tefillah. The nafkamina is Rabbeinu Yehuda's business about tefillas tashlumin. Will you be able to fill in that which you omitted? If it's a separate chiyuv, extraneous to the essence of matbea shel tefillah, that you're only repeating Shmon Esrei in order to achieve that azkara, to mention that which you omitted. And therefore, tefillas tashlum would only be meaningful if indeed you can fill in that which you omitted. If, on the other hand, we're talking about omitting something which is an essential bracha, an indispensable part of the Shmon Esrei, then you didn't daven at all. And even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that in that case you needed tefillas tashlumin. Whether or not you add that which you subtracted or not is irrelevant, because you're missing that magic number of tefillos which Chazal obligated you in on a daily basis. So therefore, Reb Chaim says the following: shining talumota. The language is beautiful. Shehu miseder atfilo. Maybe you saw on the side I wrote in migufa shel birchas hashonim. She'en omer talumota havi mishana mimatbea shetov chacham havle kiyu lo ispalel. He has essentially omitted that bracha. I'm just curious if anybody here in our little humble gathering here today, by sheer association, could tell me where do we find this same language in Reb Chaim elsewhere, that he uses the language ki'ilu lo ispalel klal. It's a very famous Reb Chaim. I'm sure you've all studied it. Do you remember what I'm talking about? This is the Reb Chaim about someone who gets to a point in his Shmon Esrei, somewhere, I don't know where, in the middle of his Shmon Esrei, and he's thinking about the interview he has tomorrow for a job. And at that moment in time, he has no kavana that he's omed l'fnei hashchina. Reb Chaim says it's ki'ilu lo espal klal, and it's like he was medaleg. That's the language of Reb Chaim. Medaleg osa bracha. So imagine, let's say it takes me. This is ridiculous, but I'm just using it as a number. Let's say it takes me 19 minutes to recite 19 brachas, a minute on each bracha. For one moment of time, he had a mental lapse. And for that one moment, when he recited one bracha, whichever bracha it might be out of the 19, it doesn't make a difference. He was thinking about his job interview. Reb Chaim says it's as if he skipped that entire bracha. And since the enterprise of Shmon Esrei is 18 or bust, if he omitted one bracha, he's got to daven Shmon Esrei again. If, on the other hand, he had one bracha in which he didn't know what he was saying, the language is very complicated. Like, for example, Hashiva Shovteinik for Rishona. Very complicated bracha when you think about it. Different dimensions of that bracha, multi-motif. So he didn't have kavanah for Pirush HaMilim, which, by the way, is not a good thing. You're talking to the Almighty and you're not even sure, you don't even know what you're asking him. But at least you know that you're in front of the Ribono Shalom. You have the basic kavanah of Omed L'fnei Hashchina. Reb Chaim says that in such a case, if you had kavanah for Pirush HaMilim in Avos, the first of the 19 brachos, Moged Avraham, then you were Yotzeh. And that's a sugya in the Gemara and brachos on Daf Lamed Daled. But if, on the other hand, for one bracha, you had a lapse, a total mental lapse, and you didn't even realize, somebody has to wake you up to realize that you're standing in front of the Shekhinah, then in such a case, it's tantamount to having skipped that entire bracha because kol tefillah below kavanah lav tefillah, and then he's going to have to repeat Shmon Esrei. Unless, again, he catches himself at some point. But I'm saying if he already took his 3 steps backwards, he's going to have to repeat the entire Shmon Esrei. And the one who disagrees with Reb Chaim is none other than, anybody know? Who is the great bar plukta of Reb Chaim? Reb Chaim's chidushim on the Rambam.
Chazon Ish.
So the Chazon Ish says no. He would not have to repeat Shmon Esrei. The Rambam says, kol tefillah below kavanah lav tefillah. Says the Chazon Ish, he always has a yediyah keha, some sort of innate or latent awareness of the fact that he's standing in front of the Shechina. Wow. A deep, profound psychological insight of the Chazon Ish, which Reb Chaim would not accept, obviously. Reb Chaim holds, if he's thinking about his job interview, then for that lapse of time, it's a mindless act. And it's not a ma'aseh tefillah, which is called what in halachic terms, universally throughout Shas? A mindless act.
Dover Shein is Chaim?
No, misasek. Dover Shein is different. Dover Shein is a ma'aseh.
Yeah.
Whereas misasek is not even a ma'aseh. You put it from a carbon. Whereas Dover Shein was kamen was probably more like shogeg. Again, I mean, it's complicated. I'm making it a lot simpler. But if a person rolls over in his sleep, or let's say a person is trying to edit a Sefer Torah, make sure that all the words are correct, and he happens to recite Shmona, let's say the Gemara has a case of Kriyat Shema, that's called misasek. And blowing a shofar for the sake of shir, l'chora should be misasek. Okay, so that's another suit. But anyway, there's a concept called misasek. The Gemara actually has a case where a man falls on top of a woman in a way that he has a bias ervo, a rayas with her. And that's called misasek. But the Gemara says that a rayas is different, and the Torah says in arayos, you're chayav a karban, even though you're misasek. Shekei nen, But again, the general rule is that misasek is a mindless act that I'm not even aware of, and it's not considered my maisa, it's not my action. And Reb Chaim claims that if your mind is on the interview that you have tomorrow, or later on today, for a job, then for that period of time, you're involved in a mindless act. You're not even aware of the fact that you're standing in front of the Shekhinah. Reb Chaim was not aware of the Chazon Ish, who's going to argue that there are different levels of consciousness and awareness. But getting back to our sugya, Reb Chaim argues that if you omitted v'sein talumot levracha, it's ki'ilu lois palel klal. That bracha Shmon Esrei, which is called BiVirkas HaShanim, otherwise known as BiVirkas HaParnasa, the ninth bracha, you skipped it, says Reb Chaim. You omitted it. Because the matbeah of the bracha includes a bakash of geshamim. And you were not mavakish geshamim. And therefore, even though Rabbeinu Yehuda says, in the case where he omitted Yalav V'Yovel, he will not recite a tefillas tashlumin after Rosh Chodesh because he doesn't gain anything. But in the case of omitting the same Talmud Levracha, for example, Mincha and Erev Shabbos, he will repeat Shmon Esrei as a tefillas tashlumin because Ke'ilu lo ispalel klal, that Mincha on Erev Shabbos, in which he omitted mention of Geshamim, is not a tefillah. It's not a cheftzah shel tefillah. It doesn't have the matbeah shel bracha the way Chazal established it, which includes a bakasha for Yisham. And here's where Reb Chaim would take sharp opposition to the position of the Yeshuas Yaakov. Again, Reb Chaim was not aware of the Yeshuas Yaakov, but that's not my point. Reb Chaim is taking tefillah, and as he always does, smashes it into two. There's the basic tefillah, which is the matbeah shel tefillah, and then there's a chiyuv hazkara tefillah, in which I'm obligated within the framework of my Shmon Esrei to mention the day. But that's not part of the basic tefillah. And that's why Rabbeinu Yehuda and Tosas emphasize ukfar espalel Shmon Esrei. So the tefillas tashlumin is not to replace the Shmon Esrei. He already has Shmon Esrei. He's already recited Shmon Esrei. He's already fulfilled his basic chiyuv tefillah. He's lacking and missing a chiyuv hazkara. Then tashlumin makes sense if and when he could fulfill that obligation of hazkara. But to daven just for the sake of a tefillah, that he doesn't have to do, and he cannot do because he already had the tefillah. Also lo tefillah, even if he did not fulfill his chiyuv hazkara, also lo tefillah. Ukoloshan atosa now, the yudches kvar ispal. Nimtzo shemash ispal arba shtayim hu rak kedei lahazkir yalav v'yovel. Tefillah he has already. We checked off the box of tefillah. He recited all Shmon Esrei brachos. Elo what? He missed that chiyuv hazkara to fulfill the obligation of mentioning that today is Rosh Chodesh. Tefillas tashlumin he only needs in order not as a tefillas tashlumin, but as a tefillas hazkara. If he has the opportunity to repeat Shmon Esrei and now fulfill his chiyuv hazkara nicha, that makes sense. But if it's already motzei, over zman of batal korban, it's too late. There won't be any hazkara. Then it's pointless to repeat Shmon Esrei because he has the basic kiyum of tefillah in his back pocket. He's achieved that kiyum. Mashenkin of the same Talmud Levracha argues Reb Chaim. That's an essential part of the matbeah shel tefillah, and therefore, in the omission of the same Talmud Levracha is Ke'ilu lo hispalel klal. He virtually omitted that bracha, and he didn't daven because, as we said, it's an all or nothing proposition. He doesn't have 19 brachas. If he didn't daven, then he has to have a tefillas tashlumin, even if he won't ask for geshem in that tefillas tashlum because it's Leil Shabbos. I'll tell you, Rabosai, just a comment, an emotional comment here. This to me is Reb Chaim in all his glory. You know, if you're looking for a shtickle Torah, a little bit of a chiddush of Reb Chaim that will give you a taste of what Reb Chaim is all about and his methodology of classification and conceptualization of what we call tzvei dinim, different dimensions and categories of different halachas, of one halacha, smashing one halacha into two. This is an excellent example. The only problem is that Reb Chaim's premise that the same Talmud Levracha is part of the Matbeah Shel Bracha, and it's part of the essence of the ninth bracha. I should whisper this, is against the Gemara. Because the Gemara tells us in Brachos Daf Chav Tes that in Shachach, if he forgets the same Talmud Levracha, then Yochol Li'omer B'Shomei Tefillah. Before he got to the conclusion of what we call the Brachos Hemtsoyos, the Brachos HaMakosha, namely Shomei Tefillah, before that, he woke up and he realized, I left out the same Talmud Levracha. And the Gemara says, let him ask for Geshem in Shomei Tefillah. Now wait a second. This makes no sense whatsoever according to Reb Chaim, because the upgraded status of Shomei Tefillah means that I could ask for all sorts of akoshos during Shomei Tefillah. But I can't replace a bracha that I omitted by inserting it into Shomei Tefillah. Minon, Dover said. Minon immediately. We never had such a halacha. We never found that Shomei Tefillah would be an opportunity. Let's say, for example, he omitted Atachone Lodam Das. Oh, wait a minute. He's in the middle of Shmon Esrei. He reminds himself, I forgot to recite the bracha of Chonin and Das. I'll put it into Shma Kolenu. No dice. No such halacha. We do not have license to take a bracha that we omitted and insert it into Shomei Tefillah. If a Saint Talmud Levracha is a Tosefes Bakosha, like the Tosefes Hazkara of Yalav Yavo, according to Reb Chaim, then it makes sense. Then the Gemara is absolutely sparkling. You forgot to mention Bakoshas Kishomim, put it into Shomei Tefillah. But if, according to Reb Chaim, that ninth bracha of BiVirkas HaShanim, essentially in its very essence, its very matbeah, requires Bakoshas Kishomim, and therefore if he left out Kishomim, it's Ke'ilu Dileg, it's as if he skipped over the bracha of BiVirkas HaShanim. How would the Gemara allow him to fix that up by inserting such a Bakosha into Shomei Tefillah? So,
couldn't you say, we know, doesn't the Gemara say afterwards that if he misses it by Shomei Tefillah, he'll have to repeat Shemon Esrei. So it might be floating in somewhere in Shemon Esrei, but it's still a integral part of Tefillah.
Well, no, again,
that's the only.
Let's take the example, the model of Yalav Yavo.
Yeah, but again, Yalav Yavo.
Wait a second. If he leaves out Yalav Yavo, he's going to have to repeat Shemon Esrei. That proves that it's essential. You need it very badly. No, says Reb Chaim, you have tefillah even without Yalav Yavo. Well, you understand. The same thing should apply in the same Talmud Levracha. You have the Shemon Esrei. You recited the ninth bracha. Baruch Aleinu Hashem Elokeinu Hashana Zos. We've asked Hashem to bless this, the shefa and so forth, all the parnos that we needed. Ella, what, he didn't ask for Geshem?
Because
he's missing Geshem. That's critical. Just like if you miss Yalav Yavo, that's critical. But To put it into Shomei Tefillah. Who ever heard such a thing? You omitted a bracha in Shmon Esrei, and then you're going to put it into Shomei Tefillah? In Yiddish, we say "V'ken design." How could it be? It cannot be. Let's see it inside. I mean, it's a brilliant kasha on Reb Chaim. The question is, what's Reb Chaim going to say? The Yadua Masha Tamuel Das Moran Agrachzal. The in BMS the same Talmotoi Chelik Miguf Birchas HaShanim, as Reb Chaim assumed. It's Tzarich Ir Mahadim Avur Bebrachos Daf Chav Tesam and Aleph. Gabi She'ela Bebirchas HaShanim.
Berzon, where are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. We're in the first of the 2 pages that you have in the Harerei Kedem. Always thank David for sending that out. We're on the bottom right column, the bottom of the right column of the first of those 2 pages, which is page Reish Samates, or if you want to call it Simon Kuf Nun Zayin. You have it?
Yeah.
Good. So v'yadua. Okay, I'm not going to repeat that line. Just he says the following: that the Gemara in Brachos says, "Gabi sheila birchas Hashem dim shachach v'nizkar kodem shomei tefillah, ein machzir no so mitnei sheyachol li'omer b'shomei tefillah." V'chein pasuk Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Kuf Yud Zayin Hey. Asher muchach mizeh the gam sheila b'birchas hashanim lo havi elo. Again, you can't use the term chovas haskara because haskara is related to Kedushas Hayom, to a festival, to a special day that's endowed with its own unique status. So that particular terminology of Chovas Haskar would not be appropriate in any event for the same Talmud Torah. So he calls it a Chovas She'ela Bi'alma. The Chazal established that you must ask for Geshamim. And how do you ask for Geshamim? Where do you ask for Geshamim? Within the framework of Shmon Esrei. If you omitted it, then you'll have to repeat Shmon Esrei in order to fulfill that Chovas She'ela. Just like we said, if you omitted Yalav V'Yovo, you will repeat Shmon Esrei in order to fulfill the Chova of Haskara. Haskara's Hayom. But the essence of the bracha of the Shmon Esrei, you already have. Therefore, now the Gemara makes sense. Or my bear of Birchas HaShanim, Ma'yahanim Yazki b'Shomei Tefillah. Okay, very nice that he adds a Bakoshas Geshamim and Shomei Tefillah. But so Birchas HaShanim lo birech. That bracha he omitted. That's what Chaim explicitly says. That when he left out for Saint Talmud Bracha, he has essentially virtually omitted the bracha of Birchas HaShanim. The Chaser bracha Shmon Esrei. You can't take an entire bracha that you omitted and shove it into, pardon the expression, shove it into Shomei Tefillah. You can't do such a thing. And here's where Rav Yosef Dov HaLevi Soloveitchik, the Anakel, tries to defend his grandfather, Reb Chaim.
Unless you say that that's part of the takana of Shemei Tefillah, is that it's literally as if you're, putting the bracha into Shemei Tefillah. That was the takana of Shemei Tefillah, that it allowed you, just like in Shemei Tefillah, you're allowed to put in other bakashos and so on. that specific takana of Shemei Tefillah allowed for you to remedy what you missed in Birchas HaShanim.
If you take a look on the next page, Bobby, I think, again, we have to polish up the nusach of what you're saying, to use Reb Chaim's language. But take a look, it's page Reish Ayin. Again, we're running low on time, so I'm hoping that we'll have time to fill in the part that I skipped, but just because you mentioned that response, that answer, and this develops within the context of one of the Shittas of Rishonim. Again, we'll get back to that Machlokes Rishonim in a minute if we can. he says the following: "De b'shachach li omra." If he left out the same Talamot Levracha BiVirkas HaShanim, this line 4 on page Reish Ayin, Tiknu lo din tashlumin. A new takana that we never heard of. Tashlumin for a bracha that he omitted. We never heard such a thing. Certainly not within the framework of Shmona Esrei. You could talk about Tashlumin if he missed the entire period of time, and the next Ona, he will daven an extra Shmona Esrei, the second of which is a Tfilas Tashlumin. The B'shachach li Omer BiVirkas HaShanim tiknu lo din shel Tashlumin, anaya din of Tashlumin, sheyachol lahashlim, ma shechiser BiVirkas, b'bracha, meaning the BiVirkas HaShanim, BiVirkas Shomea Tefillah. Wow, this is amazing. That Shomea Tefillah has two different functions. Number one, it's an all-inclusive tefillah, which means that anything that you want to ask for is always appropriate to insert into Shomea Tefillah. I call it an all-inclusive bracha, as opposed to the other brachos and tzoyos. Each one has its own theme. So we have the 3 brachos rishonos, which is Shevach, the 3 brachos achronos, which is Hodah. 6 minus 19 gives us 13 emtsoyos, and 12 out of those 13 are what we call specific tefillos. 1 out of 13 is a general tefillah, and the nafkamina is that if in the middle of, let's say, Birchas Chonen Adas, I would ask for Parnasa, that would be a hefsek. But in Shomea Tefillah, I can ask for anything. I have a job interview tomorrow, I'll ask for success in the job interview. And that is appropriate for Shomea Tefillah. Now we have a second halacha, a second function for chalos bracha with regard to Shomea Tefillah. Shomea Tefillah is the sof kol emtsoyos. It's the last of the 13 middle brachos of Bakosh. And Chazal established that within that framework of the last bracha, you have tashlumin on that which you omitted in any of the previous 12 brachos of Bakosh. Sheyachol lahashlim ashechiser bebracha. Again, this is not, I want to add a petition, Hashem, help me because I have a job interview tomorrow. No. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a tefillas tashlumin within Shmona Esrei, a radical halacha that we've never heard of. It's brand new, and that tefillas tashlumin will allow, with regard to the previous 12 brachos, any of them, to add and be mashlim the bracha, and it's a tashlumin on that bracha. I don't need a tashlumin on the whole Shmona Esrei. I'm still in the middle of my Shmona Esrei, and the other 11 brachas were fine, but the 12th, whichever number it was omitted. And now I can add it as a tefillas tashlumin within the framework of Shmona Esrei in Shomea Tefillah. Sheyachol lahashlim ashechiser bebracha BiVirkas Shomea Tefillah shu sof habrachos hemtsoyos, special status to the very last bracha of that entity, of that body or corporate enterprise called emtsoyos or bakoshos. Kedei shelo yivorech brachos yiseros b'Shmona Esrei. Why did Chachamim, what motivated the Chacham to establish Shomea Tefillah as that category, affording me a tashlumin? What did the Chacham try to gain by that? They wanted to gain the possibility that we can obviate the need, circumvent the need for having a new Shmon Esrei, an entirely new Shmon Esrei. Because you know that I always remember Rabbi Weber's Sabal. You know, we always have to try to limit the amount of brachas that we recite. It's not like free for all, recite all the brachas in the world. No. We're very very limited and very restricted in terms of how many brachas we make. So in order to avoid a scenario in which you'll have to recite the entire Shmon Esrei again, another 18 brachos, Chazal established the possibility of being mashlim one of the bakoshos of the middle 13 brachos as a tashlumin in the framework of Shomei Tefillah, a brand new halach. Avol, the ofen sheshachach gam b'Shomei Tefillah, if he did not add the same Talamotu Levracha and Shomei Tefillah, is then he's going to have to daven the entire Shmon Esrei again, and he doesn't have this new din of Tashluma because he already prayed Shomei Tefillah. The Chozer Adin, the Omer Shomei BiVirkas HaShanim Shom B'Mekoma, then he has no option, unless if he remembers before he takes his 3 steps backwards, he can go back to Shomei, to BiVirkas HaShanim, and then repeat all those extra brachos. But in order to avoid having to repeat all those extra brachos, Chazal established a tefillas tashlumin in Shomei. Now, with your Rishus Rabosa, what I'd like to suggest is to give me an opportunity to finish this up next week, and then to take a look at Hegyonei Halacha of Rav Mirsky Shlita, of Yitzchak Mirsky's Hegyonei Halacha, and David sent out both, but I wanted to make sure that we were well grounded in the sugya of BiVirkas HaShanim before we would analyze the Hegyonei Halacha. So even here in Eretz Yisrael, we have to consider that next Wednesday is the first day, I believe, that we'll be reciting BiVirkas HaShanim. For you gentlemen in Canada, it won't happen until December. So for sure, it's still relevant to discuss Geshamim next week, if that's okay.
It's good for the Rav, it's good for us, of course.
Tomorrow night, I have a shiur. It's called From Brisk to Breslov. And what I want to talk about is Geshamim from the perspective of Rabbi Nosson, who was the disciple of Rav Nachman. And all of a sudden, Geshem takes on a whole another meaning. And he's going to try to explain why is it appropriate to mention Geshem in the second of the brachas of Shmon Esrei, which is called Gevuras Geshamim. I understand Gvura, you make a Gzeira Shava, but why conceptually is there a connection between asking for rain and the second bracha, which is basically about Tchias HaMesim? And Chazal say that the Geshamim will like Tchias HaMesim. But what's that all about? So that I'm going to talk about tomorrow night in that shiur, because Rabbi Nosson said something amazing about Geshem, about what is Geshem. Now maybe I'll get a chance to add that also after we finish Hegyonei Halacha next week. Okay then.
Okay.
Do you gentlemen have any elections coming up like we have here?
We just had a municipal election yesterday.
Municipal. Okay.
Yeah.
So-
James Pasternak, who's our local politician, from fellow, won again, so that's good.